Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. Today I want to talk about my opinion about what you should do after a relapse or recurrence to drug or alcohol use. This is something that's experienced, unfortunately, by a lot of people who are trying to recover from substance use disorders. And the question often comes up, well, what's the appropriate thing to do after you've had a relapse, after you've used again, whether it's gone back out for a long period of time or just had a one night slip up where you had a lapse of judgment and you need to get back to your program. And honestly, regardless of the nature of the relapse, to me, the answer is the same. I will preface this by saying I am not in any way a trained professional on this. This is just my opinion from working with different people through the AA program and from the things that I've read and talked to people about. That being said, I do feel like the answer is fairly simple. And I think there's two parts that we need to look at. The first is an objective examination of what happened, what led to the relapse. And this is what a lot of people call the relapse autopsy. And this is looking at, were there events going on in my life prior to the relapse that might have led to that? Were there things, if I'm working a recovery program, were there things that I either was doing maybe in the wrong way or wasn't doing at all that, had I been doing them, might have prevented the relapse? Or was it a situation where maybe I wasn't working a recovery program and need to consider doing that in order to prevent relapses in the future? So the relapse autopsy is something that I would always encourage people to undergo with someone who has some kind of experience with doing those kind of things, whether it's a counselor or a LCDC or their sponsor or mentor in a program of recovery, someone who can really help guide them to objectively look at that. It's important that this be done in an objective manner, and I keep using that word because one of the things that I think is inadvisable in this situation is to really beat yourself up and feel an inordinate amount of shame and guilt when this has happened to you. Some shame and guilt is probably appropriate. I think those are good motivators to get us back on the right track. But too much, and we run the risk of moving from appropriate shame and guilt into inappropriate self-pity, self-loathing, which are emotions that fuel addictive behaviors and might be prohibitive in our attempts to try to get back on track. So that's the first thing, is really doing a thorough, objective relapse autopsy to look at, why did this behavior come up again? What are some things that I was doing that might have contributed, or what were some things that I wasn't doing that I need to incorporate into my life in the future in order to prevent this? The second thing is moving on and moving forward in recovery. The people who I have seen who have been successful in overcoming any kind of recurrence of alcohol and drug use have picked up and moved on, and they have started their program back up. They have taken the advice of people like sponsors, people like counselors, who have given them advice on what to do, which in a lot of cases, when this happens to someone in the AA program, a lot of times they will start their step work over again. And because the idea is, well, if this is something that's happened to you, then more likely than not, it's not going to hurt to revisit all of the basics of the foundational steps of this program. So I think that picking back up and moving forward with the work that you're doing, super important. And I've seen a lot of people who are able to do this very successfully, and you can't do that under the burden of extreme shame and guilt. You need to have some hope that if you reapply yourself to this work with the wisdom you've gained from the relapse autopsy that you performed, then your chances of success are even higher. And so that's what I think are the two most important parts of the question, the answer to the question, what do I do after a recurrence of alcohol or drug use? And we can get caught up in trying to make things too complicated. And that's why for this one, I really like to simplify it. Keep it as simple as possible. Look, there's two things. Examine what happened and then move on in a way that makes sense, in a way that will get you back on track and is different than what you did before. That's the other thing. You can't just go back to doing the same thing. You've got to look at, well, what's something that I should have done differently? Maybe it's I should have been going to more meetings, or I should have been volunteering more often, giving of myself more often. Or maybe it's that you were holding a lot of resentments against people and you need to work on that part of yourself. Whatever it is, taking that, making that change, and moving forward. So don't want to dwell on it an enormous amount, just enough to get that wisdom to know, what do I need to change to keep going, and then keep going, because it's totally possible. It is totally possible to have long-term recovery after a relapse. Just because you have had a recurrence of drug or alcohol use doesn't mean that you're doomed to repeat that forever. You can break that cycle and enter into a life of long-term continuous sobriety. But it takes some work, and these are the two steps that I think are most important to apply to make it happen. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.